The roar hit first, not the crash, not the smoke, not the twisted metal, just the sound. A deep, violent thunder rolling across the speedway as stock cars blasted down the straight at nearly 180 miles per hour. It was the mid-1960s, one of the most dangerous eras in American racing, and every lap felt like a gamble with death. The smell of burning rubber mixed with high-octane fuel. Engines screamed at redline, drivers gripped steering wheels with white knuckles, and somewhere in the grandstands, thousands of fans held their breath every time cars dove into a turn 3 wide. Then a driver lost control. The car slammed into the wall, metal exploded into the air, pieces scattered across the track like shrapnel. The crowd fell silent, wives covered their mouths, crew chiefs sprinted toward the wreckage, and suddenly, people inside NASCAR began asking a terrifying question. How fast was too fast? Because hidden inside garages across America was a new Ford engine that promised to push speeds even higher. An engine so powerful, so advanced, and so controversial that NASCAR would never allow it to compete. Most people know the legend, few know the real story, and what happened next changed American racing forever. To understand why, you have to go back to a time when Detroit's horsepower war was completely out of control. The early 1960s were a battlefield, not just between drivers, between corporations, Ford, Chevrolet, Chrysler. Every company wanted one thing: domination. Winning races sold cars. It was that simple. The formula had been proven over and over again. On Sunday, race on the track. On Monday, sell cars in the showroom. Buyers walked into dealerships asking for the same car they saw crossing the finish line. Salesmen pointed to victory lane photographs hanging on showroom walls, and executives counted the profits while planning their next assault. Nobody took that more seriously than Ford. The company had already developed the FE series big block engines. One of the most famous versions was the mighty 427 cubic inch V8. With a 4.23-inch bore and a 3.78-inch stroke, the standard racing 427 was already a monster. Depending on configuration, it produced anywhere from 425 to well over 500 horsepower. In NASCAR trim, some teams claimed numbers closer to 550 horsepower. These engines were built tough, cast iron blocks weighing hundreds of pounds, forged internals that could withstand brutal punishment, valve covers that leaked oil onto scorching exhaust manifolds, and a sound that made grown men step back when the throttle opened. But Ford engineers weren't satisfied, not even close. They looked at the competition and saw trouble coming. Chevrolet was getting stronger. Their big blocks were evolving rapidly. Engineers in bow-tie camps were burning midnight oil, developing new cylinder heads and higher-flowing intake designs. Chrysler was preparing new weapons. Rumors circulated about advanced hemispherical combustion chamber designs. Whispers in the pits suggested Chrysler had something truly special in development, and Ford wanted an engine that could destroy them all. So they created something extraordinary, the Ford 427 SOHC, the Cammer. At first glance, it looked like a normal 427, same displacement, same basic block architecture, same intimidating presence. It wasn't, not even remotely. The standard 427 used pushrods to operate its valves, a proven technology, reliable, simple to maintain. The new engine used a single overhead camshaft on each cylinder head. That meant more airflow, higher RPM, more horsepower, better breathing at sustained high speeds, and a completely different personality. The engineering team essentially transformed a rugged NASCAR workhorse into a race-bred monster. The development process had been intense. Engineers spent countless hours testing different cam profiles. They experimented with valve spring rates. They modified oiling systems to handle extreme RPM. They redesigned combustion chambers to optimize flame travel. The massive timing chain measured more than 6 feet long. It snaked from the crankshaft up to both cylinder heads. One chain driving both camshafts, an engineering marvel that also became a potential weakness. The cylinder heads flowed dramatically better than anything Ford had built before. Intake ports were larger and smoother. Exhaust ports evacuated spent gases more efficiently. Valve angles were optimized for maximum flow, and the combustion chambers were works of art. Compression ratios ranged from around 11.0, 1 to over 12.5, 1 depending on application. With a single 4-barrel carburetor, power exceeded 600 horsepower. Race versions running dual 4 barrels often produced 650 horsepower or more. Some drag racing builds reportedly approached 700 horsepower. A few radical experimental combinations may have pushed even beyond that threshold. In 1965, those numbers were almost unbelievable. Most street cars produced 200 to 300 horsepower. Performance cars might reach 400. The truly insane machines broke 500, but 650 horsepower from a naturally aspirated engine was nearly incomprehensible. It represented a quantum leap, a generational change in performance potential. And there was a problem, a very big problem. The camera arrived during one of the darkest periods in motorsports. Fatal accidents were becoming impossible to ignore. Drivers were dying, not occasionally, not rarely, with horrifying frequency. Tracks were getting faster, speeds were climbing every season, banking angles increased, straightaways stretched longer, cars were getting more powerful. Horsepower numbers that seemed impossible just 5 years earlier were now commonplace. Engineers kept finding ways to extract more power, and drivers kept pushing closer to the edge. Safety technology was years behind where it needed to be. Seatbelts were primitive, many were simple lap belts. Shoulder harnesses were still evolving. Installation methods varied wildly between teams. Fire protection was limited. Fuel cells didn't exist yet. Drivers wore basic cotton or thin Nomex suits. Fire suppression systems were crude at best. Helmets and roll cages were improving, but not fast enough. Some roll bars were barely adequate. Helmet technology lagged far behind impact forces. Neck and head restraints didn't exist. Every major racing organization was feeling pressure. Fans loved speed. They packed grandstands specifically to watch cars push beyond normal limits. The thrill of danger was part of the attraction. Officials feared the consequences. Every fatality brought investigations. Newspaper editorials questioned the sport's future. Families grieved. And lawyers started asking difficult questions. Then tragedy struck again. Throughout the early and mid-1960s, several high-profile driver fatalities shook the racing world. Every deadly accident created new headlines and new questions. Names that had been celebrated became memorials. Victory lane celebrations were interrupted by funeral processions. Drivers who had survived close calls started questioning their own mortality. Were the cars becoming too fast? Were manufacturers pushing the limits too far? Was the pursuit of speed outpacing human ability to control it? And what would happen if Ford unleashed a 650 horsepower overhead cam engine onto NASCAR's biggest tracks? Nobody knew. But many people had a guess. The answer scared them. Ford planned to homologate the engine for competition. The company expected the Camry to become NASCAR's next king. Marketing departments prepared victory advertisements. Engineers were confident they had built something truly special, something competitors couldn't match quickly, a technological advantage that would take years to overcome. Drivers were excited. The prospect of that much power was intoxicating. Imagine pointing 650 horsepower down Daytona's backstretch. Imagine the acceleration, the speed, the glory. Rivals were worried. Chevrolet engineers knew they didn't have an immediate answer. Chrysler was working on the Hemi, but timing was uncertain. Independent teams wondered how they could possibly compete, and NASCAR leadership was paying very close attention. What they discovered next changed everything. At Daytona and Talladega-style speeds, aerodynamic drag increases dramatically. It's not linear, it's exponential. Adding another 100 horsepower wasn't just about faster acceleration. It meant significantly higher top speeds. Speeds that tires weren't designed to handle for extended periods. Higher corner entry speeds, faster approaches to turns where any mistake became magnified. Higher closing speeds during accidents. The difference between surviving and not surviving a crash, and greater forces when things went wrong. Physics doesn't negotiate. The Camry wasn't merely another engine, it represented a new level of performance, a step beyond what the infrastructure could support. Some insiders believed race speeds could climb beyond what existing tires, chassis, and safety equipment could safely handle. Engineers ran calculations. They projected lap times. They estimated terminal velocities. And some of those numbers crossed into territory that made people uncomfortable. Whether those fears were completely justified remains debated today. Some argue NASCAR overreacted. Others believe the sanctioning body prevented catastrophe, but the concern was real. NASCAR's leadership looked at the overhead cam design and found another reason to object. The engine wasn't installed in regular production cars. You couldn't walk into a Ford dealership and buy a Galaxy with a camera under the hood. The sanctioning body argued that stock car racing should remain closer to production vehicles. That was the spirit of the sport. That was what separated NASCAR from pure prototype racing. Ford disagreed, vehemently. The company argued that limited production versions could satisfy the rules. They pointed to precedents. They cited other engines that had been approved with minimal production numbers. They made their case passionately. Behind closed doors, many suspected something else: pure racing politics. Because if the camera raced, it might dominate. Complete domination creates problems. Fans lose interest when outcomes feel predetermined. Television ratings suffer. Sponsors question their investments. And dominance creates enemies. In 1965, NASCAR officially ruled the engine illegal. Just like that, no competition, no race wins, no glory. Ford's masterpiece was out. The company's engineers were furious. Years of development, thousands of testing hours, prototype builds and rebuilds, dyno sessions stretching late into the night, countless dollars invested, gone. One Ford insider reportedly compared the decision to building a fighter jet and then being told it could never leave the runway. The frustration was real, the disappointment was crushing, but the story wasn't over, not even close, because Ford refused to let the engine die. If NASCAR didn't want it, drag racers certainly did, and that's where the camera became a legend. The quarter mile became its new battlefield, a different kind of war, no long straightaways, no sweeping turns, just raw acceleration over 1,320 feet of asphalt. The results were terrifying. Cars powered by the SOHC 427 started producing performance numbers that sounded almost fictional. Lightweight drag cars were running deep into the 10-second range, times that made spectators question the scoring equipment. Some eventually broke into the nines, single-digit elapsed times in street-legal appearing cars. Trap speeds exceeded 140 miles per hour. In an era when many streetcars struggled to reach 100 miles per hour, the camera was rewriting expectations. Mechanics loved its breathing ability. The overhead cam design delivered power where pushrod engines ran out of breath. Drivers loved its power curve, strong everywhere, violent at high RPM. Racers loved its intimidation factor. When competitors saw those giant valve covers in the staging lanes, they knew they were facing something special. Psychologically, half the battle was already won. Yet even legends have weaknesses, and the camera had several. The massive timing chain could stretch, especially under hard use. Stretch meant timing variations. Timing variations meant lost power, or worse. Valve train components endured enormous stress. Springs fatigued, retainers cracked, cam lobes wore if lubrication wasn't perfect. Maintenance requirements were high. This wasn't an engine you assembled and forgot. It demanded attention, constant monitoring, regular rebuilds. Parts were expensive, very expensive. Building one correctly demanded skill and money, lots of money. Back then, a complete SOHC engine could cost thousands of dollars. Serious money in the 1960s. That represented months of average wages. Many teams simply couldn't afford it. Only a relatively small number were ever produced. Most estimates place total factory production at roughly 500 to 700 units. Some sources suggest numbers on the lower end of that range. Others claim slightly higher. Exact figures remain unclear. That rarity would later become part of the engine's mystique, but during its active years, rarity created another problem. Replacement parts weren't always easy to find. Break a cam and you might wait weeks for another. Crack a cylinder head and your season could be over. One mistake could end an entire racing weekend. Still, racers kept coming back because when the engine worked, nothing sounded like it. a mechanical symphony of cam chains and high RPM violence. Nothing pulled like it. The acceleration was addictive, and very little could beat it. As the horsepower wars intensified, Chrysler introduced the legendary Hemi. The 426 Hemi became the Camry's greatest rival. A different approach to making power, pushrod design, but with hemispherical combustion chambers. Brutal effectiveness. Chevrolet continued developing its big blocks. The Rat motor evolved. Mark IV engines grew stronger. Competition became brutal. Every race was war. Every advantage was temporary. Every victory was hard-fought. The Camry was no longer the future of NASCAR. Instead, it became a symbol of what might have been, a reminder of opportunities lost. Imagine for a moment that NASCAR had approved it. Imagine 650 horsepower overhead cam Fords battling Hemis at Daytona. Imagine the speeds, imagine the drama, imagine top speeds climbing even higher, past 190, maybe approaching 200 on 1960s tire technology and suspension design. Imagine the headlines. Would Ford have dominated? Would the Camry have proven unbeatable for several seasons? Or would Chrysler's Hemi have fought back effectively? Would safety concerns have escalated faster? Would accidents have become more severe? Would NASCAR have been forced to implement restrictions sooner? Would NASCAR have changed sooner? Different rules, different safety requirements, a different evolutionary path for the sport. Nobody knows, and that's exactly why enthusiasts still debate it today. The mystery never went away. By the late 1960s, the world was changing. Insurance companies were targeting high-performance cars. Premiums skyrocketed for muscle cars. Young buyers found themselves priced out. Government regulations were increasing. Safety standards, emissions controls, fuel economy requirements, emissions rules were coming. The Clean Air Act was on the horizon. The golden age of unlimited horsepower was ending. The muscle car era would soon face challenges it couldn't overcome. Economic realities, regulatory pressure, cultural shifts. Ford gradually shifted focus. Priorities changed. Marketing budgets moved toward different vehicles. The Camry's moment had passed. Production stopped. The dream faded. Assembly lines went quiet, at least officially, because legends never truly disappear. Decades later, original SOHC engines became some of the most valuable Ford power plants ever built. Collectors paid enormous sums for authentic examples, 5 figures, 6 figures for particularly special units. Prices that would have seemed insane in 1970. Restoration shops hunted rare parts. Entire businesses emerged around sourcing components, valve covers, timing chains, camshafts, each piece precious. Replica builders tried to recreate the magic, some successfully, others fell short. None quite captured the mystique of an original. And every time one fired up, people stopped to listen. That sound still carried the same promise, the same threat, the same what if. The promise of what NASCAR never allowed the world to see. Today, many enthusiasts casually say the Camry was banned because it was too powerful. It's the simple explanation, the one that fits on a t-shirt. Others argue it was banned because it wasn't truly a production engine, the technical justification, the rulebook reason. Some point to growing fears surrounding racing fatalities and increasing speeds. The safety argument, the responsible position. The truth is probably a combination of all three. Politics mixed with legitimate concern, technical arguments hiding competitive fears, safety worries amplified by corporate rivalry. The Camry arrived at exactly the wrong moment, a moment when racing officials were under pressure, from media, from insurance companies, from grieving families, a moment when safety concerns were growing, when every accident brought new scrutiny, when speed itself seemed dangerous, a moment when one revolutionary engine looked a little too dangerous for comfort. And that's what makes this story so fascinating. The Ford 427 SOHC didn't fail because it lacked power. It had more than enough power. It didn't disappear because it wasn't innovative. It was years ahead of its time. Instead, it became trapped between engineering ambition and a sport struggling to control its own speed, caught between what was possible and what was permissible, between corporate desire and sanctioning body authority, between progress and caution. In the end, the Camry became something even more powerful than a winning race engine, it became a legend, a machine surrounded by controversy, politics, tragedy, and endless what-ifs, an engine that never got the chance to prove itself on NASCAR's biggest stage, an opportunity lost to time and circumstance. And maybe that's exactly why people still talk about it 60 years later, because sometimes the most famous engines aren't the ones that won. They're the ones that never got the chance, the ones that exist in permanent potential, forever frozen at the moment before victory or defeat. If you enjoyed this story, let me know in the comments which forgotten Ford engine we should cover next, and make sure to subscribe so you don't miss the next deep dive into the machines, rivalries, and hidden stories that shaped automotive history.